Hello, friends. Today I am joined by Katie Waalkes. Katie is a wife of 12 years, mother to 6 kids, and she runs the YouTube channel Life in the Mundane. She is passionate about encouraging parents in their biblical parenting and helping homeschool moms in their journey. Katie has a unique perspective on homeschooling as both she and her husband grew up homeschooled, like me and my husband. And as a second generation homeschooler, she has been both the student and the teacher. And so she has much to offer on the topic. And she hopes to be able to help you start making the most of the little moments in life, as the mundane moments are often the most impactful. You can find Katie at lifeinthemundane.com or on YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook as Life in the Mundane. And I am so excited to get to talk to you today, Katie, as I have enjoyed watching your YouTube videos over the past year. And now it's like a good excuse to get to talk to you in person. Well, Katie, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and why you got started homeschooling.
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm a second generation homeschool mom. My husband and I are high school sweethearts. We met in high school and married just a year after and started a family right away. Our kids are very close in age, the first 4 and then the last 2. There's kind of 2 different separate sets. So we have an 11, 10, 9, and 8-year-old, and then a 3 and 2-year-old. So our life is always crazy. There's never a dull moment whatsoever, but we roll with the punches and we go with it. And then I was homeschooled most of my time, not all, but I was homeschooled most of the years growing up, and I'm the oldest of 7 kids. And my husband was homeschooled all the way through, and he is the middle of 8 kids. So lots of fun experience with homeschooling. And just as far as how we got started with homeschooling, honestly, it was just kind of the way we had always planned to do it. It's how we grew up. We loved the experience from it. We had very different experiences. Mine was probably more positive than his, but I think what we both saw from it was that that there was a lot to be gained just from that love of learning and the process. And not so much focusing on just the academics or the outcome of having a perfect child, but really just getting to get to know yourself and have that relationship with them.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited to dive into that with you in a little bit. I remember having some of those same conversations with my husband before we were married, and we just both had pretty positive experiences homeschooling for different reasons. I think both of our families of origin had different strengths and different weaknesses. And so to be able to talk about that and then kind of come up with our own way of wanting to do things. And of course, our children then will remember our own strengths and weaknesses too. But to be able to, I guess, apply the things we learned in our own way has been one of the great privileges, I think, of second generation homeschooling for sure. Well, how has your approach to homeschooling or your philosophy of education changed or developed over the years? And how does that aspect of both of you being second generation homeschoolers, how does that impact your perspective as parents?
Yeah, so I think one big thing was that we kind of had a good foundation that we had to talk through, like you said, because our parents handled things very, very differently. And like you said, strengths and weaknesses. So we talked through a lot of that before we even had kids, let alone before our kids were, old enough for school. And so we had a lot of that basic philosophy, I feel like, down before we got started. That was a huge pro. I didn't have to sit there as a new homeschool mom and be like, what are all these curriculums and what are the options? Because I was the oldest, so I was the guinea pig. Like, my mom tried all of them on me. And so, I had a lot of experiences with that, but his parents were more like, we pick one curriculum and we stick with it and it's just going to work. And so it was really different approaches to things. So we kind of laid down that foundation of philosophy of like, we want to make sure that we do instill that love of learning and that we really put those relationships first within the family. However, I would say my approach has definitely changed as you get into it, because it's all nice and philosophical up at front. You're like, I know exactly how I want to do this. And then you get into it and you're like, that didn't work the way I thought it was going to work. So
I actually have real human beings,
right?
Yeah, my children are actual human beings who have their own minds about things. Who would have thought?
They don't care what was in my head beforehand. They just they do their own thing. And I think, that's been one of those things where it's been a lot of trial and error and figuring out what works. I think at the beginning, I was really caught up on researching all of the different methods, Charlotte Mason and classical, am I textbook person or unit study person? And I tried to put myself in like one box as a whole. And I realized that there are very few people out there that are hardcore, just one thing or another. And most of us can take a little bit more of a fluid approach to it. And I found a lot of freedom when I finally came across that and realized that I didn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah, I think being an eclectic homeschooler or just being a homeschooler who isn't ruled by your label, I think that we can learn a lot from, a philosophy that fits well with our family or that we're aligned with in the principles, right? So the principles can kind of guide us, but not to so be boxed in by the labels that we can't actually enjoy the living thing that is education and that is in our own family. Yeah. Well, Katie, what have been some of your favorite parts of homeschooling?
Oh, that's hard. There's a lot. I think for me and my own kids, it's been getting to read aloud with them, like getting to explore things through new books and just getting to see those light bulb moments. We have a lot of struggling learners in our home. We have some kids with some severe dyslexia, as well as some other medical complications and things. So when I once heard a mom explain it this way, and it was so helpful to me, was she was like, in order to enjoy those light bulb moments, you have to kind of stumble around in the dark for a while. And you have to go through some struggle to enjoy it. If they just picked it up the first time, you wouldn't recognize it as a beautiful thing. And so that really helped my perspective of going, okay, there were some days where I was like, are you ever going to get this? Like, oh my goodness, I don't even know. And then they did get it. And we both took ownership in that and celebrated that. And those are those lessons, the ones we wrestle with as adults, as kids, are the ones that really stick with us the longest.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's such a good reminder to think about how you don't actually appreciate those light bulb moments until you've had the contrast. It's actually the contrast. It's the hard work you've put in, the grit and determination, the perseverance by God's grace, and sometimes those really hard homeschool days where you just feel like they're never going to learn. That when they do learn, it just makes the joy so much greater. And I know for me, it helps me remember when I've had those moments, it helps me remember, this isn't really about me as the homeschool mom. It always reminds me to give thanks to the Lord for his grace in those homeschool moments. I always want to think it's me and really it's not. So
Yep, so true.
Well, what have been some of the challenges of homeschooling that you have faced thus far, and how do you seek to overcome those challenges?
I think there's been two major ones, and one is just realizing that I'm not my mom. My mom did an excellent job homeschooling. And when I started, I really wanted to get the same results she got. But I had to recognize we're different people. We teach differently, but more importantly, we have different kids. They're different human beings in front of us with different strengths and weaknesses. And I was definitely trying to force something at the beginning. And when I really started to look at what my teaching style was and my kids' learning style was, and really take more of the principles they taught me and apply them rather than the exact methods, that helped a lot. And then the second one would definitely be, just because we have struggling learners, has been realizing the beauty of just one more step forward. It doesn't, to stop measuring against certain standards or comparing to other kids or other parents, and really just seeing the beauty and just we say all the time, the whole Dory, just keep swimming, just one more step in front of the other. And that is something we can celebrate.
Katie, I didn't put this on our list of questions, so we can cut this out if we need to, but that kind of makes me wonder, especially with your struggling learners, was that something that you've just, that attitude and that mindset change, was that something that you've just sort of grown in over the years, or are there any particular resources that you would recommend to my audience for their for their encouragement?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's definitely been something I have grown in, for sure. I'm not going to say, some of my siblings were struggling a little bit, but not to the level that my kids have. And so that wasn't something I saw modeled exactly. But my parents did do a good job of modeling that, very specific, really tailoring things to our specific strengths and weaknesses. And so I was like, okay, I was familiar with that. So it took a long time to figure out that a lot of my kids have different curriculums, which, you know, at times can be challenging, but there are ways that you can incorporate that. That's a lot of what I talk about on my channel, is how to kind of incorporate all these different, personalizing it for each kid, but having 6 kids and how we make that work. But one book that was super helpful to me was Homeschool Bravely by Jamie Erickson. It's not on working with your special learners, but it kind of deals with those fears that homeschool moms face, including having special learners. She has a whole section on it. And that was just really, really encouraging to me to see a very successful mom who, you know, has done amazing things, but who has really just kind of broken down, how can we gauge our progress with our struggling learners? How can we stop comparing it, but making sure we're continuing to push? Because this is always the challenge with struggling learners, especially special needs kids. It's making sure that you're giving them not too much to squelch their level of learning, but giving them enough to push them to that next level where we don't become compliant. So she had a lot of great resources and great things to say in that book.
I have seen that book and heard it recommended so many times, but have not yet read it myself. But I'll have to add this. Every time I talk to one of you wonderful podcast guests, I always end up with like 10 more books to go buy or put on my library hold list. So
it's a very good audiobook.
Oh.
I actually have it on audio, and I listen to it every year during the summer. I listen to that one and Teaching from Rest every year to kind of just reset me before going into the new school year.
Oh, that is a great idea. Just sort of getting your mindset in the right place before you get down to the nitty gritty. I'm a very big picture person, so I have to start like big picture ideas. Let's start up here. And then the details of the day seem to go more smoothly. And I will include that book in the show notes for sure. Well, Katie, one of the things I love, of course, is just the name of your channel, A Life in the Mundane, definitely caught my eye because so many of these moments of motherhood, and especially as homeschool moms, can just feel so ordinary, so hard, not because necessarily they're challenging, although sometimes they are, but just because they're so very mundane. And it can be so easy to think, oh, when we just get to this next stage, things will be easier and be better if we can just like get through today or get through this year or whatever. And we then end up neglecting the beauty that's in this very day that God's called us to. So how do you encourage moms to switch their perspective in the midst of a life in the mundane?
Well, I think that there's kind of a couple of different ways. You know, we always want to deal with the heart issue and decide, you know, why is this a point of discontentment? Is this a point of discontentment? And I think that's a big factor. You know, what are we consuming? Are we consuming tons of Pinterest posts and Instagram posts and things that are causing us to compare ourselves to someone else's stage of life, or their finances, or how their children are acting, or how well they're doing academically? And we need to make sure that we are being mindful of, you know, doesn't mean we have to cut out those things, but we just need to be mindful of how much of a diet we're taking in. Just like your kids with candy, you wouldn't let them sit there and just chalk back a full bag full of candy. It's not bad for them to have one after dinner, but not, you know, every day. And I think it's the same thing with this kind of stuff. We have to be careful of the content we consume. Make sure we're putting a healthy diet before us of being in God's word and having good encouragement of biblical women who can lift us up and help us to realize that those mundane moments matter. And then every once in a while have a little treat of, you know, maybe something on social media or whatever. And that's a lot easier said than done. I'm not going to pretend like that's a piece of cake.
Yeah.
But I think the other factor, or along with that, I guess, would be finding ways to be thankful in the moment that you're in. And so one way practically that can look like that we do in our family is we just go around the table every single night and we share something we're thankful for. And we write it down on a note card. I just kind of write it down for everybody. And we have a box hanging on our wall in our dining room that is our thankfulness box. And we just drop it in there at the end of the night. And I find something really beautiful in writing it versus just saying it. Because it's something you can go back and reference. It also, you give a little more thought to it, I think, but we also make the rule that that nobody in the family can repeat something they've already said ever. Now some parents ask me and they say, Katie, you have 6 kids. How do you keep track of that? And the answer is I don't. Trick of the trade here. I do my best. I'm like, I think you've already said that. And they'll be like, okay, I did. And they usually admit it themselves and we go on. Like, it's not, but the whole point is to really push and encourage them and push and encourage us to think of things beyond the Thanksgiving things of like, I'm thankful for my family and my house, and that's great. What else? Give me more. And so I found that one, cultivating that attitude of thankfulness all along will help starve off the discontentment. But in those moments when you're really struggling, when, for instance, when you have 4 kids, 3 and under, who are painting your wall with a Sam's Club size of peanut butter and are painting their wall and each other, it's in their hair, it's all over your couch, all over your carpet, and you come downstairs after a really rough day to discover this, you might be struggling to find the thankfulness in that moment. Let's just be honest, okay? So if you can't pull up something to be thankful for in that moment, you can go back to that box, reach in and grab a handful of cards and see how God has been good and how he has provided all along. And that encouragement can keep you going in those hard moments when you physically can't think anymore about anything else positive. So that's an encouragement. And then one other thing, and I'm sorry, I know this is something I'm passionate about, so I'm a talker with going. This. But I think the other factor here is to look at and say, if we are struggling with being in the moment, is it because it's discontentment, or is it because something's just not working? And I think this is a good thing to balance out. What are the areas where you're struggling to be in the moment? Where are the areas where you are struggling to function? And is there a system or something that needs to change? Maybe something needs to go in your life, that you have too many things on your plate. Maybe it is such that you need to just work on how you can approach something better. Maybe you need some help. And that's definitely a valid thing, and needing some outside help. So I just think it's good to look at the whole part of it. Look at the hard issue for sure first. And then once that is done, if you've kind of dealt with that and you're like, I feel content, Katie, I'm overwhelmed. Then we look at the real practical and say, what can we do to make those little moments easier? Which is, again, what I do a lot on my channel is focusing on like helping you with just through those little everyday moments, so that hopefully maybe we can give you a system or a resource that'll just help make that a little bit easier.
That is also very encouraging. And I love how you kind of make the distinction of, is it a heart issue? Like, is this something you need to repent about? And sometimes it is. And sometimes we want to ignore that. But sometimes it's like, no, actually, you've repented. Okay. And then you actually still need help. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. It doesn't mean you have failed. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means literally there's too many things for you to do and you need some help. And I love your idea about writing down the thankfulness things. That has been a long time practice in our family, to go around and say things we're thankful for. In fact, we've been known to like break up fights like in the car or at the dinner table by just like, everybody has to stop talking and we go around the circle and you have to say something you're thankful for about the people at the table. And we've done that verbally, but I'm thinking that writing it down, which is something we do often around Thanksgiving, but just having that as a common practice might really be transformative. And it would certainly make a good memory to look back at later.
Exactly. Well, and it's funny. We have the 2-year-old, she shares what she's thankful for. And she's like, I'm thankful for macaroni. And then later we're able to laugh about that as we look back at that. So it is definitely a fun way. And you can do it in a journal or with the note card. So it's very much up to people's personal style. But I think the practice has just been really transformative to our family.
I love that. Okay. I'm gonna have to like move on here for our podcast, but I'm going to be thinking about this and figuring out how I'm going to apply this in my family for sure. Well, I have 5 children from 5 to 15. And so I have a feeling we've had a common experience. You're out and about, or someone finds out how many children you have, and they say some variation of like, you must have your hands full, or how do you do it all? And if somebody ever asks me the question like, oh, just how do you do it all? Sometimes I literally will look at them and just say, I don't.
Yeah.
Because that's just true. But, jokes aside, what are some of your strategies for staying organized as a homeschool family of many?
So, I definitely don't do it all by any stretch of the imagination. There is no homemade fresh bread being made here. There is no like garden being planted. Like, there's a lot that doesn't get done that a lot of people do. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, but I think a big factor for us has been putting systems in place that can kind of run on autopilot. There's a lot of flexibility. It's just a framework to kind of set your family on track. So 2 systems in particular that we use in our house is one, as having a buddy. Each day there is one child that buddies up with mom who helps me prepare the lunches for the day. And for that particular day, we have the same thing. Every Monday for lunch, we have the same thing. Every Tuesday for lunch, we have the same thing. So because those kids stay on those days, they get to master that particular meal. And then once they've mastered it, then we might switch up the meals a little bit. But now it's to the point where my kids are able, the 4 older ones are able to cook lunch one day a week each day, which is hugely helpful in your homeschooling day because it gives you a minute to recoup or spend some time with the littles. So that's been really helpful. And then another one has definitely been with our independent work, kind of giving our kids some ownership over their work. So we have just made little charts. You can use pictures, you get online, you can draw something, you can write it depending on their age, but just giving them 2 to 3 tasks at least that they can do independently. And for little kids, I know this is hard. Like I remember thinking there's nothing they can do independently, but it can be as simple as like play with your counting bears, you know, you don't have to direct their play with your counting bears, or take some time to go create. That could be painting something, drawing something, coloring something, writing a book, performing a play, whatever. Take some time to create. Take some time to listen to a podcast. We love podcasts in our house. We're addicts. Listen to a podcast, watch a Leapfrog movie, whatever it is. For young or for older kids, there's usually something that we can do to help them take a little bit of ownership over that. So recently, my husband and I had COVID, which was not fun, and we had it at the same time. And our kids, I really expected to come downstairs to a nightmare of disaster, of epic proportion. And really, it was neat to see that some of those systems that we had in place, that they fall along. I'm not going to say they did it perfectly or that it was done the same way it would be done if I had been well, but they were able to jump in and help with a meal here or there, or they were able to not do all their schoolwork, but they were able to do all their independent work. And that was hugely helpful that we had those systems in place for emergencies like that, so that the house can just run a little bit smoother during those times.
That's awesome. And I'll make sure to get you to send me some links to some of the videos where you lay out some of those systems, and we'll include those in the show notes too.
Awesome.
Well, I am asking the same questions to each of my guests here in season 3. So the first question is just, what are you reading lately?
All right, so with my kids, I'm reading Wonder right now, which has been really good. We're enjoying that. And then personally, I'm working through it slowly because there's so many nuggets of truth in there, but through Risen Motherhood, which is all about taking those Monday moments and presenting the gospel in those Monday moments. So I thought it was super fitting, and it's been so good. I'm like rereading chapters, and I don't know if I'll ever get through the book because there's so much in here.
My sister-in-law highly recommends the Risen Motherhood podcast, and I've listened to a few. My podcast feed gets so full, so I just cannot keep up with all of the wonderful podcasts. But the episodes I have listened to from their podcast are wonderful, and I saw on social media when they published, I guess relatively recently, the book is within the last year or so. Is that right? Yeah. So we'll definitely include a link to that. It's a wonderful gospel-centered podcast, and I'm sure the book, if it's anything like their podcast, is going to be fantastic. Well, Katie, what tips would you have for homeschool mom whose day seems to just be going completely off the tracks?
Well, first of all, I would say there's nothing wrong with sometimes taking a day off, and that's an important factor. But for those days where you really, for whatever reason, need to just kind of push through it, but you're struggling, we actually have a bad day box. And it's just a box of a few educational activities. I have a list in there. I'm actually going to have I have a video coming. Well,
in the magic of the podcast world, when you hear this, the video will already be published.
It will already be out. Okay. So I have a video out on this specifically with some printables if you guys want to check it out. But basically, we have a list of podcasts and YouTube channels and fun educational videos to watch on different streaming services. In that box, we have some Usborne fun books that we don't normally have out, some educational games, but just kind of a box for when we're having a rough day and we need to go off track. We can go to that and pull from some fun educational resources and just mix it up in our family. And that's been a lifesaver.
I love that idea. I'm going to create like a mom bad day box. And do you think we could put some chocolate in there too?
Yeah. So in my bad day box, I actually have, for mom, I have some M&Ms in there because I love M&Ms. And I have a ring of Bible verses that has different cards in there of just encouragement to a mom's heart. So for me, I pull out the M&M and the Bible verses. I go over those first and get my heart and my mind right. And then we jump into the fun with the kids.
That's fantastic. My old pastor retired now, but he and his wife one time gave me, I think it's called something like Faith's Checkbook. Maybe it's Spurgeon. I don't know. I would have to like look for it on my shelf. But I remember there was a time where I would go to it often, and it was just like, kind of, you think about a checkbook or a bank where you go and you can get the money that you've put in and that you've deposited. And in a sense, it was reminding you that these are these truths, these promises of the Lord, and you can go to them. And he said this in his word. So when you're feeling afraid or worried or whatever it is, you can go and remember, this belongs to me. This is mine because Jesus is mine. And that was an encouraging book. So I think that, yeah, the best thing we can do on a bad day is remember what's true.
Yes.
So I may, in fact, need to go pull that book out and read it myself today. It might be one of those days for me, just saying. So, Katie, where can people find you all around the internet?
Yeah, so I'm pretty easy to find on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. It's all Life in the Mundane, really simple. And then I also have a website called lifeinthemundane.com. And I'm working on some special projects right now. I am working on a book, Lord willing, all about growing up homeschooled. And part of it is getting to share the experience of other people who grew up homeschooled as well, and sharing what lessons do we wish our parents would have known, or what were the most impactful lessons our parents taught us. And my hope with that is to survey as many people as I can to share with moms, with homeschool moms now, to give them encouragement and to help them know where to invest their time and energy and what really matters, like what actually sticks with your kids after the fact. So it's been a fun project to be a part of. And so hopefully that will be coming sometime in 2021.
That is really exciting. And do you have a place where people can go to share their stories?
Yes, if anybody grew up homeschooled for any period of time, whether it was a couple of years or all throughout, love to get your input. It's just a 10-question survey. In reality, it's like 3 questions, actually. Most of it is demographic stuff. And I will send a link so that can be included, because I think that it would be great to hear from as many people as possible.
Fantastic. Well, I will link up to all those things in the show notes for this episode at humilityanddoxology.com. And I look forward to reading that book as well. Katie, thank you so much for coming and chatting with us today. I know this will be an encouragement to many mamas.
Thank you for having me.